Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the reissued Bounty Hunter Mustang Funny Car. It's a 125 scale MPC model kit number 788. This kit's seen multiple box arts and releases over the years, and it doesn't have a skill level listed, but I would consider it suited for the intermediate to advanced builder. It requires glue and paint and has some intricate assemblies and large decals. The kit consists of 80 plus parts molded in white and clear with chrome plated parts and black vinyl tires. There's some flashing and mold marks that will need to be removed before finishing. There's not much in the way of paint color callouts from the instructions, so just follow the review to produce a model of good caliper, as I've done the research for you. Now sit back and enjoy this build of a nice kit. The dimensions when finished are approximately 8 inches in length, 2.5 inches wide, and 2 inches high. Here are the contents of this kit, and it kind of looks like what some people would call an open box review, but they'd pick up every part and tree and try to find some words to describe them, but that won't help you put the kit together now, will it? So I'm going to show you my open box review in about 10 seconds. For the most part, we'll be using Model Masters liquid cement, or sometimes super glue for strength and white glue for clear parts. But you should be reminded to follow the manufacturer safety and use guidelines for any of the products you see here in the review in order to preserve your personal safety. Here are the decals for this kit, and as you can see, the color is good and the registry is very good. Now, I strongly suggest for large decals like this that you use an aftermarket setting solution to provide them to stick to the contours of the kit and stick well to the plastic. From the get-go, I'm going to deviate from the instructions and start with the body in order to give it time to cure and harden and be ready for assembly. Most of the time, you're going to need to clean up that body by sanding any of the parting lines that you find or mold imperfections, etc. Sometimes using filler, etc. So go ahead and do that now, and then you can use a good etching primer in the color of your choice depending on your final color. In this case, it's going to be a white car, so we'll use some white primer. So go ahead and spray your car with the primer after you've gotten it all prepped and finished, and then set that aside to dry thoroughly. Once dried, I gave this a good coat of white acrylic enamel. After it had dried, I then went ahead and started with the decals. Now I recommend that you start on one side and work to the front or from the back and finish one side and kind of let that dry before moving on to the next section, because they will stick to your fingers if they're not thoroughly dry. So put these into place. Use plenty of warm water to both remove them from the backing and to use it to place the decal on the body. And then squeeze it out like a squeegee with a soft cloth to remove any trapped water or air bubbles and place it where you need it to be. Then once again go over it with some of that setting solution to let it really wrinkle into the contours properly. Once that's done, you can set the car aside to dry. I had painted this rear window silver, which is one of the few paint callouts that are in this kit. So take and go ahead and do that at the most convenient spot for your build. Also, a little investigation turned up the fact that most of the fiberglass bodies on the funny cars had a flat black underside, so I went ahead and hand painted that flat black to kind of match with historical information. Also, after it had all dried for a couple of days there, I gave it an overall spray of clear lacquer. One of the options in this kit is the choice of front rims. So the ones on the left come on a large kit sprue, and the other ones on the right on a separate sprue for this build. Those are Halibrand mags, and I used a silver marker to change the inner part of the rim from chrome to a more correct tone for the halibrands and decided to use those. The rear slicks for this kit are really awesome, especially the raised, or I should say the Tampa printed Goodyear emblems on the sidewalls. You don't get that with a lot of brands anymore, so take advantage of these. Anyway, the instructions show the back of the rims to be painted black, but from my references I see more of like a dull silver, so I used a silver marker on the visible portion on the back of the rim. So add a little super glue to the inside ridge of the rim there and insert the tires on them, and then you're ready for final assembly for those. So get out the 5 pieces for the block. As you can see here, there's some flash, so you'll need to clean those up with a hobby knife. And the motor block then is assembled except for the blower manifold, which will be added with the blower assembly. So I drilled a small hole in the bottom of the block where the oil pan would cover it, and used a bamboo skewer there to mount it, and painted that gunmetal gray. And then here again, the instructions show only the blower manifold should be silver, with no mention of the other part color. So you could paint the motor block any color of your choice, unless you happen to know what this version of the model or the 1-to-1 was painted. So we'll gather up the heads and the pan and some of the other parts here for continued construction. And the first thing I did is glue the oil pan into place. And remember, always scrape the chrome plating, from any gluing locations so that it will stick together. And while the glue was setting up, I moved to the valve covers. Since I was using an aftermarket wired magneto on this build, I used a small drill bit to drill my spark plug locations for the spark plug wire inserts. So I used a small hand drill bit to drill out the location for the magneto shaft, the same diameter as the shaft was. And I also glued the blower manifold into place. I had colored that silver using the marker that I used on the rims earlier for a nice authentic look. So pull out the parts for the blower and the belt, which is molded onto the pulleys. And then you glue the blower parts together and paint the belt black. And with the valve covers in place, I inserted the magneto without glue for the time being. I know a lot of modelers will go through the top of the motor and then have the valve covers glued into place, so the plug wire doesn't need to be cut exactly to the right length. So step 3 is now completed, and with adding the wired magneto into place. So here's what the completed motor will look like. It's about step 4 there, and in this final assembly of the motor, I glued the blower parts together and then glued those into place on its manifold, and next separated the magneto wires, putting each 4 on each side, and used some silver foil tape cut in very thin strips to make wire looms. Then inserted each wire into the pre-drilled holes on the valve cover, and I used the tip of a toothpick to put in a drop of super glue, and then glue the wires where it entered the hole, and then slid the wire boot down into place over that. And with all 8 wires done, I glued the intake into place on the blower body, and I realized there should be some butterfly valves on the air intake hole, so I made some by cutting thin wafers off a plastic rod sprue and glued them into place and painted those red. Finally, I painted the belt and the fuel pump black, and they were glued into place, and the small fuel pump sort of disappeared into the motor, so I used some Tamiya clear red to make it stand out a little more so you could see it. So before we could really move on to step 6, you need to paint some of the parts. So I started with the ones that I would paint silver and left them on the sprue tree and cleaned those up. And then this pick here, you see the flash between the part and the tree, and that's all removed easily with a hobby knife. Once removed and cleaned up, the parts are sprayed with some primer, and then when they were dry, the parts then sprayed with some duplicolor silver and set aside to dry. This part was a real pleasure because mostly frames for your funny cars are assembled in sections. But this one is a one-piece molded frame, and it didn't have any warpage, just some cleanup to do. And there's no color reference, so again I just went to reference files, and the box art shows it's red, but I found pictures of it in both red and black, so I went red and I gathered up all the parts needed to be red and cleaned them up and sprayed them with some primer. And after they're dry, I sprayed them with some acrylic enamel red and set those aside to finish drying. So you'll need to paint these parts red as well. And since I was taking time to prep the red parts, I decided to clean up the few unpainted parts that were left, and luckily for me these were all going to be silver, so I cleaned those up, added some primer, and sprayed those with some silver too. Now it was time to detail the cockpit area, and I used some flat black and brush painted the seat, and although there were molded in seat belts, I decided to use the parts box that I had for a spare decal and added those to the seat belts. Now I got the parts, they were all painted, and decided to finish up step 5. So the instructions have a note that say do not glue the interior to the frame. So I continued gluing all the parts shown into place, and then removed the interior and set it aside to finish letting the glue dry. So here's your tub with the steering and shifter and gauges installed into place, and I had completed all this, so decided to do a little detail painting of the gauges in black, and the handle grips on the steering control are a tan. These funny car wheels had wooden grips for some reason back then, and the black plastic grips are aluminum's grips. So the brake handle was black, and to give the interior a little more contrasting color, spruce it up there with some detail paint. I may have mentioned this before, but as you're going through, test fit your parts, especially mating parts, to make sure that they all fit together properly of the subassemblies. So here's another set, which is set aside now for later assembly. Time to start moving on to step 6, the front suspension. So clean up the chrome plating from the axle ends of the drop axle, and the instructions tell you to cement or heat seal the wheel to the axle. So I choose to glue the wheel to the axle, since on my builds I don't like the builds to roll off my shelf. That's a personal choice. You can do what you want there. The parts are laid out, and I started with 4-piece gas tank, and then it was glued into position on the frame. And there's an upper and lower half that glues together, and then 2 chrome gas caps to be glued on. And this is supposed to be painted silver. The cross member with front shocks are painted red, so I've now painted the springs silver and then did a black wash to make them stand out. And once the shocks were dry, I glued the cross member in place, followed by the axle and the radius arms that attach to the frame and the axle. And now these are glued into place, then allow the glue to set up overnight and strengthen. I'd use some super glue on that if you can for strength, because it's weak and these parts break off. Now once the assembly is completely dry, it's time to glue the tire linkages to the axle and the tires to the axle ends, and allow the glue to dry well before setting the tires on a surface, because they will become misaligned unless you use some CA glue with some accelerator to keep those into place. So now we'll work on that rear suspension, and what I did was to put the axle tubes into the axle holes in the frame, then slide the axle shaft gear housing piece between the axle tubes and spread out the frame enough to pull the housing into place. And it's a pretty tight fit, so you don't really need to glue it there. With that done, I put the metal axle in place, followed by the brake disc, calipers, and then the wheels, which are press fits. And I make the axle holes a little larger to make sure that there's plenty of clearance for the part to go in and out. Now with our rolling chassis in place, we can add the sidewalls, the body sidewalls, to the frame. Now we can glue the bell housing and the transmission there onto the motor, and then put the whole assembly into the frame on the mounts. On the end of the transmission is a drive shaft attachment hole. that will align the motor into the correct position when you install it there. So attach the motor along with the drive shaft and glue that to the frame. And there's two motor mounts that keep the motor in place there, so scrape the glue off for that contact surface. So now we can add the wheelie bars into place, and you can see how the motor and transmission rear end align. You won't see that after the tub's in place. So I added some detail washes to the exhaust headers that were painted silver earlier. I used some clear smoke applied to the exhaust opening area, and it was put on a little thicker towards the ends of the pipes. And once the wash had dried, I used a little clear blue, that's a Tamiya product, to produce heat stains on the exhaust headers in the area near the motor, since that gets the hottest. And now with the chassis done, it's time to glue the interior tub into place. And with that in place, the only remaining parts to add are the steering control rod from the steering gear to the front axle. And in doing that, I found the header was in the way just a little bit, so I had to bend it slightly to clear those parts. So now we can install the windshield with steps 8 and 9 done. And for this I use some white glue that dries clear, and usually you just need to give it a day to set well. With the windshield in place, there's just a few more parts to complete the build. So now it's time to glue the rear body support wall and interior tub cover parts together, and when those are dry, glue them into the body. So you can have a choice here for your chutes with either a chute pack on the back end of the body or as open chutes. So here's what they look like if you use the chute pack on. Those were just temporarily placed for the photo here. So paint the open chutes red and white on alternate panels there. And in order to add the lines, I used some fishing line. And the first thing I did was cut out a base of some plexiglass, but you can use plastic or cardstock. Then cut it in a rectangle, and then that tab fits between the rear slicks. So then I cut a couple of tubes about a ½ inch long and glued them at a 45-degree angle, and painted the base gray, and used pencil lines to draw the joint lines for a piece of what would look like, asphalt runway there. And so I wanted the parachutes to be at about the edges of that, and I drilled holes in the chutes to accommodate some clear rod to mount the actual chutes themselves. And then the fishing line was added to those chutes by drilling some small holes around the edges of the parachutes, and then stretched the strands of fishing line together into those small tubes that had been mounted at the other end of the runway here. And then I pulled them kind of tight and through the tube, and then glued them into place so that they were kind of taut, just like they would be on a deployed chute. So once that was done, I just put that up to the valley underneath the car at the back end, and there you have it. It looks like fully deployed chutes with tight strings, and this was probably the hardest part of the build. So it's worth it though when you're done. The kit overall, not too hard to build. Actually, everything fit very well. The one-piece frame helped a lot and made everything aligned and straight. Everything else, just a little bit of flash that you'll have to clean up, but the decals and the subject matter is awesome, and it makes for a great display. There's not a whole lot to the kit really. It's just mostly detailing and decals, so it'll be easy for just about anybody to build, except for some of these crazy assemblies. And so I recommend anybody to get one and put it on their shelf with a little modeling skill and expertise under their belt. Well, we hope you like this premium scale model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook and always on our website at www.rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.